Alright guys, welcome back. These are the final chapters for Return of the Indian. Last we were reading, we saw that Omri had just gotten back from traveling to the past, and when he'd gotten back he was so tired he decided to fall asleep in the house. And remember, the babysitter hadn't gotten there yet, so let's see what happens in these last chapters to Omri and Patrick. Chapter 20, Invasion. He slept without dreams for 2 hours, and then something woke him. He lifted his head sharply. His mother hadn't closed the curtains, so a little light came in from the street. He felt strange, but he saw at once where he was and remembered why he was there. He was by no means ready to wake up, so why had he? Then he saw that there was somebody in the room. Coming in, rather, through an open window, facing the front garden, which shouldn't have been open. It was the sound of it opening, and the draught of cold night air which had awakened him. He was peering over the arm of the sofa, which lay in deep shadow at the farthest end of the living room. He could see the clear silhouette of a male figure stealthily putting first one leg and then the other over the sill, and ducking its head under the half-raised window frame. A bare head, which gleamed dully in the diffused lamplight from beyond the high front hedge. For a second, Omri thought it was an Algonquian, but there was no scalp lock on that shaven skull. It was a skinhead. No, not just one. Once in, the first figure bent and beckoned, and from the shadows outside appeared another, and then another, and one by one they climbed silently into Omri's house. In a flash, he remembered last night. Was it only last night? When he'd come down to fetch Bright Star something to eat. He'd seen a hairless head go past the kitchen window, and then put it from his mind. They must have been looking the place over, casing the joint, making plans for a time when the family would be out. Where was the babysitter? Normally, she would be in here watching television, but the set sat darkling in the corner. The intruders made towards it and laid hands on it. While one unplugged it and rolled up the cord, the other two lifted it between them. Would they try to take it out by the window? No. They carried it silently to the door. The cord holder opened it, and they went out. Omri swung his legs swiftly to the floor and stood up, holding his breath. His heartbeat was extraordinarily steady. In fact, he felt calm and clear-headed. There was another door to the living room, and it was the one nearest to the foot of the stairs. Moving across the carpet without a sound, he slipped out of the room and glanced towards the front door. It was open. The skinheads were going down the path, but they weren't yet ready to make off. They put the television down in the front garden just behind the hedge. Omri knew they would then turn and come back for more. He took 2 swift steps to the stairs and raced up them silently, 2 at a time. He must phone the police, but no, he couldn't. The only phone was in the hall, but he must do something. He couldn't just let them get away with it. It was bad enough that they made his life a really, really difficult one in Hobble Road without invading his territory. But the inescapable fact was that they were years older than Omri. There were 3 of them, and they probably had knives. He reached his attic bedroom out of breath, and he opened the door as quietly as he could. He stopped. It was full of strange small lights and flickering shadows. The first thing he saw was Patrick, fast asleep on the cushions on the floor. And then he noticed that the cupboard had been returned to the top of the chest, and so had the seed tray. There seemed to be a lot of activity going on in its much trampled earthen surface. Omri moved forward to look closer. An astonishing scene met his eyes. The ruined longhouse had been turned into a sort of scratch hospital. Clean pages, evidently torn from a notebook, had been laid on the floor. In a double row with a walkway between their feet lay a number of wounded Indians. They appeared to have been well looked after. The ones Omri could see, through the holes in the longhouse roof, were bandaged and covered with warm blankets made of squares cut from Omri's sports socks. He recognized the green and blue stripes on the white toweling. Bright Stars was there, her baby tied to her back, moving among them with a bucket, giving them drinks. At either end of the building burned a small fire of matchsticks and shavings of candle wax, each tended by an unwounded Indian. Around the fires, wrapped in gloved finger sacks, more braves lay asleep. Omri's eyes went to a bright light at one end of the seed tray. The stub of the candle had been stuck into the earth and lit. Around it, muttering and chanting, Little Bear moved in a slow sort of dance, his shadow hugely enlarged. He was flung all over the walls of Omri's bedroom, and the thin, weird, wailing note of his chant struck Omri's heart with sadness. Near the candle was the paddock. It was like a graveyard. Laid out on the grass were some small, still shapes covered with squares of white cotton blotted with drops of red. Omri counted them. There were 8. 8 out of 40. And all those injured? How? When they had ambushed the unsuspecting enemy with far superior weapons. It took only seconds for Omri to take all this in, and then out of the depths of the longhouse bustled a little figure in blue and white, with a tall, flowing cap. "Well," she exclaimed when she saw him, "here's a nice how do you do. Call this a casualty ward? I'd rather be Florence Nightingale. She had it easy. Whoever let these poor simple fools loose with these modern weapons ought to be shot themselves." What happened?" asked Omri, dry-mouthed. "What was bound to happen? They were shooting each other. From what I can make out from their leader, they encircled the enemy and then blasted off from all sides, never realizing how far the bullets would travel. The shots that didn't hit an enemy were likely to hit an ally coming the other way. I fished so many bullets out tonight that I could do it with my eyes shut." She bustled back to work, tutting loudly. Omri bent and shook Patrick awake. "Get up. We've got burglars downstairs." Patrick jerked upright. "What?" "Skinheads. 3 of them. They must think the house is empty. They're going to clean us out. Only they're not, because we're going to stop them." "We are? How?" "Where are the guns that the Indians had?" "They're in the cupboard. I think they've damaged a lot of them." "We were mad. Where's that bag of British soldiers that we had in the garden?" "Here, but you're not going to—" "And where's Fickets?" "He's in with them." Omri was frantically emptying the paper bag onto the chest. He found Fickets at once and almost threw him into the cupboard, remembering just in time to take the jumble of rifles, Tommy guns, and machine guns out first. And he locked and unlocked the door, and in the next moment Fickets was standing bewildered by the pile of guns. "Corporal, check those weapons." Fickets, rubbing his eyes, at once came to attention, and then began disentangling what now appeared to be a pile of scrap. Omri, meanwhile, was putting handfuls of soldiers recklessly into the cupboard. Patrick was at his shoulder. You're crazy. You're always telling me not to. Shut up and bring me something flat." "Like what?" Omri turned on him fiercely. "Use your head. Anything, a tray, a book. My loose leaf will do, and be quick." Patrick did as he was told, and Omri closed the cupboard, but didn't turn the key. "Corporal." "Yes, sir." "How much ammo is left?" "Ammo, sir? More like how many working weapons them redskins have wreaked havoc, sir. Absolute havoc. I was afraid of this, sir. These are precision instruments, sir. They're not bloomin' bows and arrows." "Well, never mind that now. I'm going to put you in charge of a Operation Fickets." "Me, sir?" "Not Indians this time. British troops. And they're going to mount an attack on 3 people my size." "God help us all, sir. How can we?" "Well, just do as I tell you, Corporal, and make them do as you tell them, okay?" Fickets gulped noisily, and then straightened himself. "As long as most of them are Marines, sir, I expect we shall manage." "Good man. Now stand by to reassure them as they come out." "No need for mollycoddling them, sir. The light's poor. I'll just tell them that we're on night maneuvers." Omri turned the key in the lock and opened the door at once. He was glad the light in the room was dim. Patrick thrust Omri's large, flat, loose-leaf book in front of the cupboard, and out into it poured 20 or 30 tiny khaki-clad figures. Some of them still had their weapons. Others, obeying Fickett's barking orders, began to man some of those Indians had used, the room filled with metallic sounds of weapons being loaded. "Shall we use the big guns this time, sir, now that we've got the crews?" Ficketts asked Omri aside. "Yes, Marshal. Marshal them all here, and tell the men to prepare for an all-out attack when you give the word." "No trouble, sir. Just don't, he coughed. "Don't, thrust yourself forward, sir. They haven't spotted anything unusual yet, if you take my meaning." Patrick had caught the spirit of the thing and was feverishly sorting out every bit of hardware that he could find in the biscuit tin and getting the cupboard and key to work on it. Soon the men, who were armed with light arms, machine guns, portable anti-tank rockets, and even a bunker buster, a Milan missile, were in position, drawn up on three sides of a square with their backs to Omri. And though this was a formidable array, Omri did not feel even in the faintest scruple. "Ficketts," he whispered, "I'm going to transport you all, and when you see your targets, give the order to fire at will." "Sir?" "And don't worry, nobody's going to get hurt." "You hope," muttered Patrick, as they started down the darkened stairs. Chapter 21. Battle of the Skinheads. They moved silently down through the darkness. Omri could feel through his hands, holding the edges of the loose-leaf platform, the faint vibrations of life. He could also, for the first time since it happened, feel the sting where the row of minute bullets had pierced the skin of his palm. On the first landing, he nudged Patrick to a stop. Low down on the bottom flight of stairs was one which always creaked. He heard it creak now. He changed directions and slipped through a half-open door into the bathroom. He and Patrick stood behind this door. There was another door to this room, which led into his parents' bedroom, and it, too, was ajar. They saw a faint light, the sort made by a pin light, feeling its way about on the landing, and heard the stealthy sounds of the skinheads. Following it, then a faint whisper, "Let's try in here." The finger of light vanished, to appear again through the other door. The intruders were in Omri's parents' room. He could hear them moving furtively about, and then the soft whine of a wardrobe opening. "Gah! No fur coats." Omri and Patrick stood rooted, hardly breathing, and Omri was almost praying that in the darkness no soldier would press a trigger by mistake. Suddenly the torchlight was within 2 feet of them on the other side of the door. "Look here, Kev." Omri set his teeth. He knew what they'd found. A little oak chest with small, shallow drawers in which his mother kept the few bits of jewelry she owned. Most of it was old silver inherited from her mother. It was very precious to her, though it wasn't especially valuable. Omri heard the scrape of wooden drawers, and then, "We can flog this law. Let's just take the whole thing." And then another voice, farther away but audible because they thought they were safe and were getting careless. "Here, I'm going to take a leak on their bed." And there was a burst of stifled sniggering. That did it. Before Omri could even signal, Patrick had let out a growl of disgust and then flung the door open. The light switch, beside you," Omri shouted. There was an agonizing second while Patrick groped. Then the top light came on, flooding the bedroom with brightness. The skinheads froze in grotesque positions like children playing statues. Their ugly faces were turned towards the boys, their eyes popping, their loose mouths gaping. Omri rushed in like an avenging fury and stopped. The loose-leaf platform with its contingent of men thrust out in front of him. What the?" And then Ficket's sergeant major voice rang shrill and clear. "Fire at will!" And the biggest skinhead snarled and made a dive towards Omri, and for a split second he loomed menacingly. And then there was a concentrated burst of fire, and suddenly tiny red spots appeared on his face in a line, from the bottom of one cheek diagonally across his nose to the top of the other. He stopped dead in his tracks and let out a howl of pain and outrage and clapped his hands to his face. "I've been stung. It's hornets. Get him for me." Behind him, his mate started towards Patrick, hands reaching out to grab. I'll get 'em, those little nerds. But all he got was a miniature equivalent of an armor-piercing shell up under his thumbnail. Ow! He shrieked, and he let out a string of curses, shaking his hand and dancing in agony. The third and smallest of the gang had been gazing at the object Omri held, and he, unlike the others, had seen. He now let out a sound that started as a moan and ended in a scream. And then he flew into a panic, dashing here and there in short spurts, yelling, "Help, help, they're alive! I've seen them, they're alive!" Through the crump and crack and chatter of the guns, which were firing continuously, the other two also turned and tried to flee. But all sense of direction had deserted them. They bumped into the furniture, the walls, and each other, swearing and howling, and giving great leaps into the air every time they were hit in a sensitive spot. Omri and Patrick added to the uproar by shouting encouragement to their little men. Patrick was jumping about as if at a prize fight or a football match. Omri had to stay still to hold the firing platform steady, but he opened his throat on a long shout of excitement as the three invaders finally found the other exit and fled through it, pell-mell. "Cease fire!" cried Patrick. "Cease fire!" bawled Pickets. And there was a fraction of a second's silence. And then the boys heard the skinhead shoving and swearing on the stairs, and one of them tripped, and there was a series of satisfying thumps, then a loud crack as one of the banisters broke. The boys, hurrying down to the half-landing, saw them fleeing along the path and heard the clatter of their boots receding along Hobble Road, accompanied by sounds of anguish. The boys turned and hugged each other. "We did it! We did it! Oh, the way you switched the light on! Terrific! And how could you hold that thing straight? I'd have tipped them all off. I was so excited. Hey, where is it? I put it on the bed." They rushed back into the bedroom, and Fickets was calmly ordering the men to clear up and cover the big guns. When he noticed the boys, he left the men and he edged to the back of the platform. "Operation a success, sir?" he asked in a quiet tone. "Oh, definitely, Fickets. Well done," said Omri. "Did I say a sergeant, Fickets?" said Patrick. "I meant a captain." "Oh, not me, sir. Too much responsibility," he coughed. "Better get the men fell in and back to quarters as quick as possible, sir." Yeah, right," said Patrick. "Thanks again, Corporal. It was terrific." And he started to carry them upstairs. "See that everything's all right up there," said Omri. "Okay." Patrick reached the door and stopped. "I don't mind so much now, missing the other battle," he said. "Wasn't this one fantastic?" "Oh, yeah," said Omri. He was thinking how fantastic it was, too. And that he would never be afraid to walk down Hobble Road again. They would leave him severely alone from now on, and that even if they didn't, having sent them flying like that, and after all he'd been through tonight, he couldn't help imagine them holding any terrors for him in the future. He looked around the room. He was going to have a bit of explaining to do. The glass on a picture was cracked, and there was a number of holes the size of pinholes and some larger ones in the wallpaper and the foot of the bed. And there was the banister and his own injuries. Well, he could tell his parents about the burglars, so there was maybe a scuffle, but maybe they'd believe it. Well, he hoped they would. He bent and he picked his mother's jewel box up off its face. He'd saved that for her anyway. Under it was a cheap pen light. He picked it up. It was still lit. He switched it off and he dropped it in his pocket. He might, if he felt like it, just hand it back to that little skinhead if he jumped onto him after school on Monday. It would be a good laugh to see his face. Omri drew a deep breath of satisfaction, and he went downstairs to bring in the stuff piled in the front garden. All right, friends, this is the last part of the book. It is an epilogue. An epilogue is what happens after the main story is over, so it doesn't have an official chapter number. It's called Epilogue by the Fire. When everything was back in place, with Patrick's help, except the banister rail, which needed gluing in 3 places, they made some hot chocolate to take upstairs with some cold potatoes and other leftovers. They both stayed so keyed up that they couldn't feel their tiredness, and they were prepared to set up all night. I sent Matron back for some drugs and stuff that she wanted. said Patrick said. But she made me promise that I'd get her again in the morning. And she said she's going to take a week's leave from St. Thomas's. She enjoyed all of this anyway. Thickets too? Little Bear hasn't enjoyed it. Omri didn't answer. Every time he thought of the Indian battle, it took away from his overwhelming pleasure in the one with the skinheads. Where's Boone? He asked suddenly. I sent him back too. He'd asked me to. He said that the odd gunfight and saloon brawl would be a rest cure after all he's been through. He said that he'd like to see us soon, when things have quietened down. What about his horse? Oh, yes, I gave him the one that the English cavalry officer was riding, Patrick chuckled. You should have heard him swear when I flicked him off. Boone was really pleased. He said he's a beaut. Really, he was happy with it, and I bet the horse will be happier with him than with that snooty red coat. And when they reached the room, all was quiet. The candle had burnt out, so Little Bear had to stop his dancing and chanting for the dead. One fire was out, and the other was burning low. The Indians, including the wounded, were all asleep, except Little Bear, who sat cross-legged by the fire. Bright Stars was asleep beside him, the baby in the crook of her arm. Patrick struck a match, and Little Bear looked up. We've brought food, Omri said. No eat, said the Indian. Omri didn't press him. He just poured a toothpaste capful of hot chocolate and put it beside him with a piece of potato. The match went out, and they sat together in the dark, with just the embers of the fire. The boys drank their chocolate, and for a long time nobody spoke. Then Little Bear said, Why Omri bring Little Bear? For the first time in 2 days, Omri thought of his prize. It had gone completely from his mind, and now it seemed so trivial, he was ashamed to mention it. Something good happened to me, which was partly due to you, and I wanted to tell you about it. What good thing happened? I wrote a story about you and Boone, and it was good. Omri write truth of Little Bear? Yes, it was all true. Omri write Little Bear kill own people. Of course not. You write before this happened. Next time, write Little Bear kill own braves. But you didn't. The now guns killed them. You couldn't know. Then Little Bear fool, came his bitter voice out of the dark. There was a silence. And then Patrick said, We were the fools, not you. Yes, said Omri. We should have known better. We shouldn't have interfered. Interfere? Omri, not afraid. We should have left you alone. Let alone? Then Little Bear would have died from a French gun. There was a pause. Then Omri said, You did beat the Algonquians. Yes, beat Algonquian thief, not beat French. Yeah, that was a pity, said Patrick feelingly. After all that. Fewer dead, the better, muttered Omri. Good kill French, Little Bear exclaimed, sounding more like his old self. Kill French next time. But not with now guns. After a silence, Little Bear said, Now guns good. Shoot far. Now Little Bear no shoot far. Next time, not put own braves where bullets go. Omri give now guns, take back. The embers of the fire flared a little. Bright Stars had risen to throw on another curl of wax, and now she crouched beside Little Bear and looked into his face. No, she cried clearly. He looked at her. What no? She spoke to him softly and earnestly in their own language, and he scowled in the firelight. What does she say, Little Bear? Wife say, not use now guns. Soon braves forget skill with bow. Woman not want son grow up without Indian skill. She say, now gun kill too many, too easy. No honor for chief or chief's son. Well, what do you think? Omri gave, now guns if Little Bear think good? Omri shook his head. Then what for I fight with wife? Give wife own way, peace in longhouse, till next enemy come, and then maybe wife sorry. He scowled at her. She smiled, bent down and picked up the baby and laid it in his arms. He sat looking down at it. What's his name? Omri asked. Name must mean much, mused Little Bear. What Omri mean? Well, Omri was a king in the old days. Omri name for big chief? Omri nodded. Then Little Bear's son named too for chief. For father, Little Bear, had first horse in all tribe. Call him Tall Bear. He sit high on horse, more high than all brave. And suddenly he clutched the baby to his chest, and he turned his face upward with closed eyes, as if bearing a strong pain. When son grow, Little Bear tell that Omri write a story. Little Bear live in story, even when gone to ancestors. That give honor, make son proud of father. Oh, he'll be proud of you, Little Bear, without any help from me. Little Bear looked up at him, and then he stood up. The fire put out a sudden flare, and he stood there, feet apart, his body glowing, his stern face for once untroubled. Omri good, he said loudly. Give Orinda back to Little Bear. Orinda, the life force. And he held his son up high in both hands, as if offering him to the future. And with that, that is the end of Return of the Indian. I really hope you guys have enjoyed it. It's always been one of my very favorite books. So thank you so much for listening. Take care.